Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video with a friend, coworker, playwright, director, producer, anybody you think that would enjoy this video, and be sure to leave a comment down below, even if it's just to say hi or tell us what your favorite play is or who your favorite playwright might be. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is a Connecticut-based playwright, fiction writer, and educator. Her 10-minute and one-act plays have had over 100 productions, having been produced professionally and at colleges, community theaters, and high schools. Her work has appeared at a number of festivals, including the New York International Fringe Festival, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, the Boston Theater Marathon, Vital Theater's New Works Festival, 20% Theater Twin Cities, the Six Women Playwriting Festival, Little Fish Theater's Pick of the Vine Festival, and multiple 8-Minute Madness festivals in New York. Her short plays have been anthologized in Smith & Kraus's The Best 10-Minute Plays, the Boston Theater Marathon 11, 2009 Anthology, and YouthPlays Middle Schoolin It, amongst other publications as well. Her plays include Antigone 3021, Gymnos, A Greek's Tragedy, Losing Our Heads, Clean, No Epilogue, Alone in the Goldfish Bowl, Bite Me, and Sculpting Perfection. She is a member of the Dramatists Guild, Mystery Writers of America, the Society for Children Book Writers and Illustrators, and Sisters in Crime. She's also a graduate of Vanderbilt University and NYU. My God, what a mouthful, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Nina Mansfield.
Thank you so much.
Drink of water. Thank you so much for coming on. My goodness. All right. First things first. What did you study at Vanderbilt and NYU?
Vanderbilt, I was a double major in theater and sociology with a minor in Russian. And and I actually spent some time at the Moscow Art Theater when I was there. I took a semester and went to the Moscow Art Theater to study acting and directing at the I believe it's through Connecticut College and the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center. It's been so long now. Wow. And then at NYU, I studied educational theater with teaching English.
Wow. That is a lot. So why a double major in sociology and theater?
It was kind of by accident. I think I always knew I wanted to study theater, but of course my parents were like, you should double major. And I went to Vanderbilt thinking I might double major. Like, they have a good education school, but then I didn't take any education courses when I was there. I took a sociology course and I really liked it. And that kind of happened.
So you use your theater degree more than you use your sociology degree?
Yeah, I definitely do, because I teach theater.
There's a first. Usually it's the other way around. So how did you fall into playwriting then?
So I after graduating from college, I went to New York to be an actor, like so many other people do sometimes. And actually, going back to college, I interned one summer at New Dramatists. Which was just this incredible experience. And I remember stage managing a reading for Robert Anderson. And it was just this incredible reading. Kathleen Chalfant, I think, was in it. I might be confusing that this was ages ago, but it was like these amazing actors, and seeing the process of this well-known playwright really dig in and work on his work. And I got on the train home. At the time I was still, I was 19. I was living at home in Westchester. And on the train ride home, I'm like so inspired. I have to start writing things. And I took the internship with the idea that maybe I can act in some of these readings. And I did end up stage managing a lot of them and reading stage directions, which was really informative. So I started writing a play, and that actually became my very first published and produced play, No Epilogue, which was a young woman, imagining sort of the backstory of a suicide, which was kind of dark comedy. But I stayed up that whole night. I was, just writing the play. I couldn't stop. And it went through numerous rewrites after that point.
Sure. You said that you learned a lot from reading stage directions.
Yeah.
Expand on that. I'm fascinated by this.
I think I learned a lot as an actor because I learned how to time what needed to be said. And they didn't always tell me, like they gave me, these were all works in progress. So and just listening to the way I had to, as an actor, read what the action was and what was important and what wasn't important to keep the reading moving, right? I couldn't just dryly read these stage directions when we were performing for an audience. I had to pick up the pace. But I just also heard the way the dialogue, what worked with dialogue, the musicality of the language, what made it a reading interesting. So I think I was learning a lot as a writer, but I didn't know it at the time because at the time I was still really considered myself an actor.
Sure.
So then after I graduated, I came to New York and I thought like, oh, I'm going to act. And then a friend of mine was wanted to, read one of my plays, and we ended up producing that. And it took me a long time to see myself as a writer. And I eventually did.
Why do you think that is?
Nowadays, I think there's a lot of actors who write, and it's been normalized, I guess. And maybe it was back then, but maybe I just had a very rigid mindset, like I'm an actor and that's what I do.
I think I'm in LA, and LA had, I don't know if it does now. When I moved here in 2000, LA had a really bad rap of being bad theater. It was a bad theater town because, and this was my take on it. And because you said actors who are writers, I think that because we're so Hollywood based, I think back in the day we had actors who thought, oh, well, I'll write something for myself to showcase my talents, if you will. They didn't really have a background in playwriting or any experience, but they thought they did. And so they would, wrote their own piece, directed their own piece, produced their own piece, started their own piece, and I think it was just bad showcasing. That being said, that's LA. And maybe nowadays it's, it's improved. I think maybe that's the difference. Maybe New York is a little bit, different in that regard. It's
funny. I stopped acting many years ago. And I have acted in my own work, but I never really wanted to. Okay. And the one time I did, I remember getting this bad review that said like, I was miscast. I'm like, I wrote the part. It's me. Miscast.
So you said that one of the things that kind of stood out for me that you said is that you saw it, when the stage directions, you saw what worked and what didn't. Can you give examples of that by chance?
I can't remember from back then.
Sure, but I mean, like hypothetically.
Example. I think, and I teach playwriting now also to high schoolers. So I think when there is just too much, right, where a playwright is just giving tons of backstory, I think that obviously doesn't work. But I also learned a really great lesson. I think it was from Gary Garrison at the Kennedy Center. I did that workshop like 10 years ago. And I think it was him who said, like, we have to write stage directions to make our plays director-proof, where if we want the actors to do something on stage, it has to actually, I'm actually misremembering completely. The dialogue has to be director-proof. So if you're writing something in the stage direction and it's nowhere implied in the dialogue, then it might not get done on stage. Because I guess there are schools of directing where they say, cross out all the stage directions. And I've never subscribed to that rule when I've directed. But I know it happens. And I've met directors who think like, oh, the stage directions don't matter. So I think stage directions should be minimal. Sure. They should inform the action as needed. But I actually write very few in my own plays. And then that's why
I want to have these discussions. And so, we can kind of sift through the process and how everybody approaches it. And I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way by any means, but, I deal with a lot of like beginning playwrights and whatnot as well. And it's just trying to find better ways that we can all agree upon things and kind of, cut to the chase and make everybody better playwrights faster, if you will.
Yeah, if it's all coming out, like if all of the action is in the stage directions, I think that works, I think, on film. But on stage, I think you need to have the actors say something and again, that's every rule can be broken, because I can imagine a wonderful scene that's totally silent and everything's happening in the stage direction.
Right.
So,
well, how do you achieve that then? How do you achieve action through dialogue?
I think it all comes from objective, right?
Okay.
If the characters are going for what they want, and it might be in the subtext, right? What they want is often in the subtext. They're often not coming out and saying, I want you to be I'm thinking of like a love story or something. I want you to love me forever. No, they're subtly, saying things and doing things that that ultimately would lead to that goal. So I think in that way that dialogue has to be really active, right? We're not just saying things like, oh, the weather is nice today, unless there's something behind it.
Right, sure. Do you think that subtext can be taught? Do you teach subtext?
Yes, I do.
Okay, how do you approach that?
We look at work where I think I really teach it more when I'm teaching acting, but a lot of this, like, it's kind of all in the same course in high school.
Sure.
So it's like looking at acting etudes where they're just saying like, so what's going on? Yeah. And looking at a piece of dialogue like that and saying, okay, what's going on here? And of course, kids will come up with an interpretation right away. They're like, oh, this is what's happening. They're boyfriend and girlfriend, or girlfriend and girlfriend, or boyfriend and boyfriend. And they just broke up and this. And I'm like, how do you know that? They're like, it's all there. It's obvious. I'm like, well, and then another group of students will come up with a totally different interpretation. I'm like, that is subtext. And actors have to know it. And I do think I approach playwriting as a former actor. I think I write things that I would want to, not that I actually want to play them on stage, but that are active, because as an actor, I knew what was fun to play on stage. If there's not enough there, and again, it doesn't all have to, the there is in the subtext, right? So
sure. When you say active, obviously we're not necessarily talking about physically active.
No. So
how do you achieve that? How do you produce action?
I think
through dialogue.
I think it's funny. I feel like I've written the same 10-minute play over and over and over again. I saw a reading of a bunch of them, maybe, at this point, it's probably been 10 years. And it was they were all basically about a woman trying to find some sanity in a relationship with a guy that was just not working. And so in Bite Me, for example, which is one of my most produced plays, the woman brings home a vampire. Right? She literally brings home a vampire so that her husband and her can live forever. They can become immortal, right? That's her way of like salvaging this relationship with her husband. And so it's all about, this is what you need to do, right? This is, you want to do this, and trying to convince him to do something. There's usually something that I think that somebody's trying. I think it also comes out in argument. I mean, this is a tough question. I'm like, what do I actually do?
Well, here's
people to do this. I'm like, but what do I do? I don't know.
Well, and again, I apologize for this happens a lot with, you're not in the process of writing anything right now. So you're not thinking about these things. So I'm going to ask more questions as this goes on, and it's going to be putting you on the spot.
No, it's great. I'm like, I think it's all about how do you go after something you want.
Sure.
So you want your husband to become immortal with you. You do something, right? And then you try to say, hey, do this thing. Well, why won't you do this thing? Well, what's going on? And then the relationship starts coming out, right? Then they start uncovering. Usually there's like this deep, dark story to the relationship, and the nitpicking. There's always an argument that explodes. In one of my more recent plays, the woman in the teal scarf, it's a full length. A woman shows up to stay at this couple's home, and it turns out she's recently become homeless. And the husband is like, we need to let this woman stay. And they don't really know her, the couple. The husband does want this woman to stay with them. He thinks it's the right thing to do to take in this relative stranger. I mean, he's met her a couple of times. The wife is like, no, like, we can't do this. So I think the conflict has to be there, and an objective has to be there. And then I really just let them talk. Like, what would you say if you were in this situation? And then ultimately, like, a backstory starts building. And it's usually that happens while I'm writing. I don't usually build a backstory beforehand. It usually happens as I'm in the process of writing the dialogue. And then I'll go back and weave in more backstory in various drafts, right? But it's like improv. Like, just improv with two characters in my head. One wants something, the other is in some way saying no, right? It's the yes and, but
sure,
it's conflict. And then I just improvise in my head, and hopefully something happens. And if it doesn't, that usually just doesn't become a play.
How many drafts do you go through before you discover that you're finished?
I'll be honest, in some cases I've done only 2. Like with the short ones.
That's impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I think Clown Therapy, which is a play of mine that got published and produced multiple times, I think I had 2 drafts. And by draft, I mean, like, there's the because sometimes they just can't, like, I feel with the 10-minute ones, it's like, it just works. And then it's like, you go back and you weave in these little things. Other times, I don't know, 4 or 5. And sometimes I've thrown things out, like I'll write something and it's like, it's so different than what ultimately happens. I'm thinking of like my very first 10-minute play, Smile. It was going to have sock puppets. I don't know. There were going to be sock puppets in it. And the premise is like men telling women to smile on the street and a woman getting angry. And I had like sock puppets and monologues, and it was just really, and what the play actually turned into was really different. So I think sometimes I write stuff that is just so throw-outable, and I don't even think of it as a draft, but it really was a draft. So I'm like, yeah, I wrote this thing in one draft, but it's really, I did all this pre-writing that got out the versions that won't work.
Sure. Okay. Do you wind up throwing like everything out and just keeping the word just kind of like, if you sat down with does the premise stick, or does it totally, transform into something totally different from where you started? Or like, where do you start? Would you start with the premise, or?
Sometimes I start with just the line of dialogue. Where it's just a line of dialogue that's in my head that I'm like, okay. Sometimes it's a premise. I think with my full-length plays, there's generally been a premise in mind that I keep investigating through scenes. So sometimes I throw out a scene. Have I thrown out a whole premise? Probably. I would say that I just don't finish those plays. Those are the plays that just go into a pile of like, old documents. I recently actually found this hard drive. I was looking for something and I found this hard drive and I found all these plays. I'm like, oh, I wrote this play. It's done. Like, why? And I'm reading through, I'm like, oh, that's why I never did anything with it. That's why this one never got sent anywhere, because I knew.
Are those worth revisiting?
I think so. I think in some cases they are. More with my fiction, I'll sometimes start like a paragraph or a short story, and I'm like, I just don't know where it's going. And then I have taken some of those and been like, oh, I like this. I don't know what I was planning to do with it, but now I have an idea. I think I get stuck. So I think it is worth revisiting any old piece of writing.
Sure.
Because sometimes you'll even find a line or a scene or a brief moment in the play that will launch you in a totally different direction.
When you say you start with a line of dialogue, and that's what launches your play, like, is that just something that pops in your head, or is it something that you heard from somewhere else? I'm like, oh, there we go. I've got an idea now based on what I just overheard, or,
So
like, I don't know if you know David Matthew Barnes. He considers himself a professional eavesdropper, and that's where he gets a lot of his ideas for his plays. So, I'm not sure if that's if you qualify for that as well, or if that somebody else said they use song lyrics or song titles and whatnot.
I think I always have like a weird conversation happening in my head. I'm thinking of one of my early plays, Crashbound. I was flying home from Italy. I was actually coming from a creativity workshop, so I was feeling very creative, I guess. And I'm sitting on the plane, and I thought, this guy sits next to me, and I thought, wouldn't it be weird if I just turned to this guy and said, this plane is going to crash, right? And this was pre 9/11. So, but I was like, that would be weird, right? And I'm like, I can't say that because that would be weird, but I'm a writer. And I took out my notebook and started writing a play with that as the first line. And I had no clue where the play was going. And it ended up, ultimately getting some productions and published and whatnot. And it was a wacky play about a wacky actress on an airplane who turns to a stranger and says that. And it's like, and what happens?
We won't reveal, so we'll keep we won't have a spoiler alert. So people want to know what happens. They got to go search it out. Do you because you do a lot of 10 minutes and what is there a 10-minute structure?
I think there
is. You follow?
I don't know that I follow the structure. I think I've kind of ingested the structure. I would describe it as this. That's the structure.
Up and down? A bell curve?
Yeah, it starts somewhere. I think it is basically traditional playwriting structure really condensed. Right, there's an inciting incident of some kinds, and it builds and it builds and it builds to some kind of climax or twist, and then there's a very short denouement. Right, it's like sometimes it just ends because it's 10 minutes. I tell my students when I have them write 10-minute plays that it doesn't need to get resolved, but as long as you have conflict and at least two characters fighting for what they want, and it keeps building until some kind of reversal. And that's, I think in a 10-minute play, it can be a bit of a punchline, right? I think there is a difference between a 10-minute play and a skit. I think there's a little bit more character development in the skit. There's, it's not just about the joke, but I think it can end with that twist. So
how do you teach character development?
Sometimes I'll have students start with pictures. That's the classic exercise. I'll print out a bunch of pictures I find on the internet, and they find two characters, and I have them do a character biography and say, who is this person? Imagine this person, maybe write a diary entry as this person. And then what does this character want, right? And often I'll have them start with a monologue, writing just the I want monologue. And sometimes they'll take that character and then use it in their 10-minute play. Other times they'll come up with two different characters. I do the improv, like the yes-no game, where I'll just have them, I actually love to do improv before they write their characters to develop them. So they'll just be saying like, yes, no. And really it's an acting exercise, but to play objective, like how many different ways can you play tactics and objectives? But then who is this character? And then free writing is that character. So that's a couple of the things that I have them do. A lot of the classic sort of acting, like if you're working on a role, who is this person? Go through their whole biography. What's their favorite color? All of that stuff. And I say some of it you might throw out, but maybe it's important that this character likes to eat potato chips for breakfast, right? Maybe that's just a little detail that you're going to work into your play.
Do you always take that approach for your own writing?
No.
Do you sit down? At what point do you implement that, if you do at all? Or do you just kind of let it just come out through the dialogue and let the character tell you who they are? That's
usually what I do.
Yeah.
I think for a 10-minute play, there's only so much backstory you can get in anyway. So again, I'll write that first draft, and sometimes a lot comes out. Sometimes these characters are I'm just like, oh. And I thinking of my play Bite Me, where I wrote this draft and I was like, no, that's not quite who this woman is. Like, what kind of woman would really bring home a vampire? Like, who is this person who wants to be immortal? And then she started, it took me a few drafts to get it right, where I'm like, oh, that's who she is. But yeah, I let the characters tell me.
I love this. So I want to, who was she first? Who was the person that wouldn't do this? And who did she become by you?
I think a lot of my characters are me. So she was a relatively nice, maybe a little wacky, but not, she became very materialistic, and her husband turned into this sort of greedy corporate lawyer. I'm sure there's many, I know some great corporate lawyers out there. I have family who are corporate lawyers, but there's a line in there about, it's not my fault they got cancer or something like that. Where he just doesn't care. And that did not come out right away. And it became a little bit of a commentary, I think, on modern times and greed, which it wasn't at first. At first, it was just a woman who wanted to be immortal with her husband. And then it was like, let me find that other layer. And I think one of the reasons it gets produced a lot is because I found the other layer. And I don't know that I always do in my plays. And I think the ones where I find those layers, those plays get produced more.
Is there subtext in Bite Me? Does she just come out and say, no, I want to be with you forever?
There's definitely subtext. There's
how.
She does come out and say that. I think there's more subtext, with the husband, where he's like, well,
sure,
we really want to do this.
What do you think? Has the fiction writing helped your playwriting more, or vice versa?
I think the playwriting has definitely helped the fiction writing, because I'm often told in my fiction that I write really good dialogue, which I would hope that the dialogue is very natural. I think sometimes it's just two really different brains I use. I feel when I feel this sense where I need to describe things, it becomes a story or a piece of fiction where I'm like, ooh, it's very atmospheric. It's a story being told in somebody's head where they want to describe the senses. Where it's just people talking, then it becomes a play.
So do you sit down with the purpose of writing one, or it just, I'm going to sit here and write today, and whatever it turns into is what it's going to be?
I think I imagine something as one thing or another. I don't think I've ever started writing something and said, oh no, this is really a play. Okay. Like, if I have it in mind as a story, it's going to turn into a short story. Now, I recently wrote a short story that I'm submitting right now, but it has a ton of dialogue in it. So part of me is like, I think I could actually also make that a play. But that's really the only time it happened, where I thought, oh, maybe this could also be a play.
So you mentioned that as far as Bite Me, and then I think there was another one that you said that gets produced a lot as well. So how are people finding your work?
I think
what's
Bite
working
Me,
for you?
I have one of the monologues from Bite Me is published in a couple of different anthologies. So I've had a number of, usually like a college or a high school will write to me. It's also published in the Best of Smith and Kraus anthology. So that's where a lot of my 10-minute plays that do still get produced are in those anthologies. I also submit. I am on a listserv called the Playwrights Binge. So I submit through there. I look at different websites that post a lot of playwriting things, so I'll submit through there. But I think Bite Me gets produced because of the monologue, or that's my theory.
Okay, sure.
And I have a few of my other short plays. They're in the Smith and Kraus anthologies, the Best of. So I think that's where people are finding them. And I get an email, and I'm like, here's what I'm asking in royalties. And yes, sure, do it.
Okay, so you pretty much represent yourself in that regard.
Yeah, Bite Me is published. So although that publisher, it's an interesting agreement where if somebody writes directly to me, I can represent myself if they find it through there. Although sometimes I've actually sent people to the publisher because it's just easier.
Sure.
And I'm more certain to collect the royalties. Sometimes I know there have definitely been productions of my work that people did not write to me. And every now and then I find them and send my little letter off.
Well, let's talk about that. Because there was somebody, I forgot who it was. Somebody said they use very clever titles. So they set Google alerts for that to where they, if a production pops up. So do you just decide I'm just going to go search my plays every once in a while to see if okay, yeah. Fair enough.
I'm just going to Google this. And I've been shocked actually. Like major universities, like, where I found something. Actually, there was one I haven't written yet. So I'm like, I really should write to this person. Because I don't like being that person, be like, hey, you were supposed to pay me for this, or at least ask my permission. I think if a student wrote to me and said, I have no money and no budget, but I really want to do your play, I'd look at the circumstances and whatnot, but I want my plays produced like everybody else.
Sure. When do you think you embraced your success, or when do you think you became successful?
Oh, have I become successful?
I don't know. So you're getting your plays produced, and you
know what it was? There was a point when I couldn't remember how many plays I'd written and where they'd even gotten, like, I was like, oh, I forgot I wrote that play and it's published. And I was like, I guess I've written a lot of plays then.
What determines how much you charge? How did you base your royalties as far as like when somebody reaches out and they say, hey, this is what I want to do?
So there's a formula the Dramatists Guild uses, which is like, I don't know what the formula is, but I once reached out to them when somebody wrote to me about a 10-minute play, and they said, ask the number of seats and how much people are charging. And so I used that formula for like a professional production. And if it's a university production, I think like, well, I've gone to some, other publishing playwrights and see like, what are they charging for 10-minute plays, and what some of my publishers do charge for my own 10-minute plays, and pretty much on par with that. Sometimes if a student writes to me and says, this is, just an in-class thing, or it's only going to be this, and we're not charging tickets, I'll do a student a break. I was giving a little bit of a break during COVID too, because I was like, nobody has any money to produce things.
Sure. How did the opportunities for publication, because there's a lot on this list, how did you go about that? Did they come to find you? Did you search them out?
Let's see. I'm not sure. In some cases, I think I've seen things posted and I submitted. And then once your foot is in the door, you kind of have an in. And it's like with the Smith and Kraus Best of anthologies, it's like, oh, okay, I would get an email like, I'm looking for plays again. So I would send off whatever 10-minute plays I had written that year and hoped that one of them got picked up.
Is there criteria that they're looking for besides the fact, okay, this is for 2022, so we're going to be doing the 2022 production. It has to have been written this year. Are there any other criteria besides that, besides length, of course?
I mean, I would imagine that they're looking, things that resonate with the editor, things that, are general, because not all of my stuff gets published, or sometimes I'll send a few. And I think usually if I send like 3, is it the one that I've always thought was the best one? I don't know.
How do they let you know if the reasons behind, like if they say, hey, look, we're going to pass this year, there's a lot of competition. We got 500 submissions and, it was really tough, or they said there, look, this needs some improvement, or like, hey, we're not quite sure about this. Do they request changes or anything, or?
No, I think like recently I just had a couple of, the latest Smith and Kraus anthologies came out, and I did submit a 10-minute play, didn't get chosen, but I did have 2 of my monologues selected for the monologue anthologies, best men's, best women's. And I don't think it was one of my strongest 10-minute plays.
Okay.
I think it's a decent play, but I think I've had stronger ones. And I feel like my strongest 10-minute plays have made it into the anthology. So I think it does just come down to quality. Right? I'm going to put you on the spot on that note. Have you ever submitted and gotten rejected, and then I'm just going to go ahead and pick up a copy of it anyways to see and did you ever read it and oh, mine was so much better than that? Yeah. No, I don't know that. I mean, there's so many plays in there, so I think some of it it's all subjective. But I think there's so many great plays out there that it's. I've definitely had instances where I've read things, fiction or whatnot, and I was like, really, my piece wasn't selected. But it was. I've had some 10-minute plays where I'm like. They got a ton of productions, and then this one theater that maybe produced a couple of my other things didn't produce that one. I'm like, really? Everybody else liked that play. So I guess it can be really subjective. They have a panelist of readers or whatever at the theater, and for some reason it didn't connect.
Where do you find that most of your productions come from?
I think these days from my published work.
Okay.
I actually took a couple of years and didn't do it. I was like, I'm not submitting anymore. I'm back to submitting these days. But I had a daughter 8 years ago, and I was like, I just got tired of constantly submitting to things because for a while that was fun. I think it's actually fun to get out there and be like, ooh, what is there? Click send the email. There's I guess it's like knitting for me. I don't knit, but I like to submit things. But I took a couple of years and was like, I'm not going to submit anything, and we'll see what happens. And I still got productions, so they were from my published work. Some of the publications with educational publishers, I have a play with YouthPlays that's anthologized with them, and that tends to get a lot of productions because it's in an anthology, and it. And it's for kids, so I think the educational markets are ones where I've found a lot of success.
Are you submitting new stuff, or just even some of your old stuff? You just
sometimes if a place will look at a published and produced play and they don't care how old it is, I will take something that's in one of the anthologies that isn't tied to because some of my plays I can't submit because they're tied to publishers.
Sure.
But if it's not tied to a publisher who's collecting the royalties, I will sometimes submit that. It's like, oh, that fits perfectly. Although I find some of them, they get dated after a while. I have this one play, Text Misdirected. It's in one of the anthologies. A friend of mine actually who teaches at a high school locally asked to produce it. And my husband and I went and saw it, and we're like, wow, that play actually didn't age well. Because it's all about technology, and it's 15-year-old technology. So.
Do you think that it could be updated?
Possibly. Yeah.
Okay.
Because really it's interesting because it's already in the anthology. I'm like, would I
Sure.
really want to update this?
Fair
But
enough.
it's about a woman who's such a Luddite and she hates technology and starts smashing everything by the end of the play. But she's, smashing like, beepers and thumb drives. It's like, we don't even need that stuff anymore.
But so hypothetically, if they took it upon themselves to update the technology that's being smashed, I guess they're taking a little bit of creative licensing, but would that bother you?
I would, if they wanted to do that, I would want to rewrite the language that I use.
Fair enough.
And I think the language, I'd have to take a look at the play because there's a rhythm to it. There's a rhythm to the way I wrote it. I wouldn't want somebody to just say, well, instead of thumb drive, let's use this. It's like, well, I want the language to sound the way I want it to coming out of the actor's mouths.
Do you always write a rhythm?
It's not like iambic pentameter or anything, but I think
sure.
there's a flow. Yes, I read stuff out loud. After I've written it, I'm always reading it. My husband's an actor. I force him to read things with me. So it's a way I want it to sound. Yeah.
You said earlier, I forgot the adjective you used. You didn't say clever dialogue. But how do you teach dialogue, or how do you approach dialogue?
When I'm writing, I just think of what would I say in that situation, or what would this character say? Because I do teach my students that every character should sound different, right? Not every person sounds the same. And that rule of thumb where you should be able to like pick out the one line of dialogue and know which character is saying it. And I break that rule. I mean, I think all my characters are basically me talking to myself in my head. So, but I do go back and think, okay, what words specifically would this person use? Who's the more uptight character? And I think you can tell I trail off a lot. So I think my characters tend to trail off a lot. There's a lot of like ellipses. That
was my next question. Sure. So then if somebody's uptight, how would that change their dialogue? I know that's a very specific thing and you're not in the height of writing right now. So
I'm trying to imagine.
And it doesn't have to be uptight. It just, if there was a personality thing that, he wouldn't have said this. This person would have said this instead.
I think I think that's the actor me stepping into somebody's shoes, right? I used to do improv. Sure. And it's like, if I were just playing this character, are they a person who, says like all the time and they're a teenager and blah, blah, blah? Or are they, the older gentleman who would speak a little more formally in a certain situation? I think there's a status thing.
Okay.
That happens. There's a status thing. There's a class thing that happens in dialogue. I mean, again, I think a lot of my characters are kind of based on me, but there's also that like what would I say? But what would I say when I've had time to think about it and it would be the wittiest version? Or what's the thing? There's always this point in my plays where one of the women has like a meltdown and just like spews this stuff that like this, I would never actually say these things.
Right.
Because I wouldn't be able to think of them on the spot, but I can think of them when I'm sitting in the dark writing. One of your bios says that you stick quirky, high-strung characters in unusual situations.
Yeah. Can you give an example of that? Besides, I mean, obviously, bite me. That's. I'm not quite sure about the quirky, except for the fact that she wants to live forever. And so, what other examples do you have in that regard? And do you always approach it from that with that goal in mind?
I don't think it. That came out of a class actually I took where like how to market a screenplay. I have this one screenplay I've written where a teacher who was supposed to go to Mars in the 1980s got frozen and forgotten. And then she's defrosted in today and she gets her old job back. So she's this like 1980s old school teacher with big hair and shoulder pads, but she's coming into a classroom today and trying to teach. And she realizes she can't smoke in the teacher's lounge. She can't rip up kids' papers. The parents aren't on her side anymore. The kids are all on their cell phones. She's like, she doesn't know what Google is. Like she's completely like, she's backwards in a lot of ways. So that would be one situation.
That's hilarious. Are her students the children of the students that she had when she was?
No, but there is a security guard at the school who was one of her teachers. And there's like this weird, like almost romance thing, but he was her student. So it's like creepy and weird. Like she's like, no. It's, I think it had a little bit of a reading a few months ago. And yeah, there's just a lot of things that have changed in education.
Sure.
So, but that's one example. Another one would be my play, Clown Therapy, where a woman goes to, a husband and wife go to couples therapy, and the husband is a clown. So you think the couples therapy is like, my husband's a clown, like, but the whole point is she has learned that he's not really a clown. Like he's just dressed up like a clown. He's like, the nose isn't real, the hair isn't real. And it's been a few years of marriage and she's just discovered like it's a costume and she's really upset about this. So that would be another.
Okay.
Yeah. You
mentioned, when you were talking about your students and, is that a character said like a lot, now I find that when you're writing, when young playwrights are starting off, there's a lot of that, not because the characters say like a lot. Do you find that that's still an issue, that there's a lot of like going on and you have to break them of that habit?
Sometimes they write more formally.
Really?
And I have to say, well, how would you say it? Like who would actually, speak in these complete sentences?
Sure.
So I find a little bit more of them trying to like write grammatically correct or whatnot, where I'm like, no, you want to, like, how would you say it? What do your friends say? Write that.
What are some of the habits other habits that you find that they commit, that you find you have to break them of?
Sometimes they want to write screenplays where they want to have a character like in a car and then entering a house, and they're not writing a scene in real time. And I think that can work for certain type of plays, but
sure.
I say real time, one location, no more than 4 characters. They want to like have all these extras in the scene and characters are driving to the mall. And I'm like, no, like they're on a stage. So, and I think there is a point where you can say, okay, I have a play that they are driving in a car. Sure. But I think the one location rule, especially for a 10-minute play, again, I've broken the rule, but for when you're starting out, I think you really have to stick to one location, one central conflict, where they're just trying to write too much, or sometimes they're writing like all this they want to write fiction sometimes. So they're writing all this backstory in a stage direction. I'm like, well, how would the audience know that? That's in a stage.
Right.
Just because we're reading the stage direction in class, because we always like do readings of all the plays in class, where an audience won't see any of that.
Yeah, I find that sometimes the other one that I find is that there's things that they know in their head, but it's not on the page, and then so therefore the audience they don't know it. Yeah. The old adage, if it's not on the page, it's not on the stage. So it's just like, but it's like, but you haven't established that yet. So I kind of find that's something that happens quite a bit as well. So, do you find that there are certain things that they're naturally good at?
conflict. I think they do often. I had this great crop of plays last year where they just were nailing the conflict. And I'm like, maybe I just got better at teaching this, or maybe I just had a really great crop of writers where the conflicts were really good. I think they do internal conflict. They know what it is. I think it's hard for them to get it onto the page without being a little too like, I'm going to break out into this monologue that's not quite appropriate for the action here, or this person wouldn't say all these things, but I think they understand character. I think it's a little harder for them to show the characters. I think they also come up with great situations often.
How do you approach conflict, and then how do you teach it as well? Because I think that there's probably two different things in there.
I really start with what the one main character wants. Once I figured it out, because sometimes I have to get out a lot of nonsense dialogue or just play with dialogue for a while. And then it's like, oh, that's what this person wants. And then what's standing in their way. And it's usually in a 10-minute play, most of my 10-minute plays have 2 or 3 characters. So it's usually the other character. It's like, I want this one thing, and it's usually a relationship play. So it's the conflict is a husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend type of thing in my plays.
And then how do you teach that?
I say, what is your character want? We play the yes/no game,
okay.
Right? What does your character want? How are they going to get what they want? And then what it's standing in their way? How, like, as if it's too easy. And I will get those plays like, well, they want this. And the person says yes. And I'm like, but that didn't
drama.
How to play. We'll make the person say. I know we do play yes and. That's what
Right.
I like to use improv as the tool to get them to their plays, to the writing, and I think it because for me it's a very organic process. Right? I didn't study playwriting formally until I had already written a number of plays, and I was approaching it from this playwriting or from this acting improv perspective of like, I've studied as an actor, so I'm going after what I want. And I knew what worked well in an improv scene, right? I always knew where I wanted the scene to go. It didn't always go there, but I knew where I wanted the scene to go. And so those are the scenes I write. Like, how do we keep building? Because you wanted to build, and so that the director in the booth has a great place to like shut the light off.
Sure. Having started playwriting, having no formal training, and then getting it later, what did you learn?
I think I learned a lot about creating backstory. And I learned more about structure, I think some of my earlier plays, the structures, they do build, but I think it takes a little longer maybe. I think that would be, it's hard to say because it's always been a mishmash of like what I learned
Sure.
and what I just kind of picked up by reading a lot of plays and seeing a lot of plays. I think one of the best things a playwright can do is just see a ton of theater. I think there's something that just kind of seeps in by osmosis. When you see a lot of theater, it's like, oh, I could do that. I could just, end a scene there, leave them wanting more for a full-length play.
Right.
This idea that every scene has to matter, especially in full-length playwriting, right? Obviously, 10-minute play, it's the one, right? But every scene, it can't just be characters giving backstory. It has to in some way move the conflict forward.
Sure.
And I think some of my earlier attempts at full-length plays had a lot of characters talking. It's like I knew they wanted something, but the audience didn't. Right.
Sure. Fair enough. What was that formal training? What did that formal training consist of?
Not a whole lot. Really,
okay.
But I
so it wasn't like a degree in playwriting or anything like that.
There was a course I took at NYU as part of my master's in educational theater. I took a course in playwriting. The work that I did at the Kennedy Center, I did the playwrights intensive there. I'm sure I've taken other classes that I'm just forgetting right now, but yeah, there hasn't been a lot of just self-study.
Okay. Which I want to touch base on as well. Let's talk about the Kennedy Center intensive. Is that something you have to qualify for, or is that just say, hey, here's my money, take my money?
Oh, I think when I did it, I had to submit an application.
Okay.
And cover letter and application, and I don't think they accepted everybody.
Do you remember what that application entailed and what the cover letter had to?
Oh, actually, I wrote a pretty just standard cover letter, and we had a thing where we had our cover letters ripped apart, and there were 3 groups of us, and it was clear that like some group, we're organized into colors, and it was clear that there was a hierarchy, and I think I was in the lowest, whatever the lowest hierarchy was, and I remember being told, like, this was like in a big group thing, like, if your cover letter just said this and you weren't trying to sell yourself as an artist and didn't show your passion in your cover letter, well, then that's maybe why you're in the group you were put in. And it was like,
wow. Wow.
I was like, I didn't know I was supposed to do that, right? It said cover letter and send 10 pages of whatever, which I did. And, I thought my play would speak for itself. And I still really am a believer that I hate writing artist statements. I wrote one recently for something, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I just want to write plays. Here's the play. Do you like my play? I don't want to talk about like what I write. My work is the play. So having to write about my work, I feel the same way about like if I have to write a synopsis for a piece of fiction, I'm like, I wrote the piece of fiction. Do I have to?
You have to read it.
Yes.
Again, this has come up a couple times in recent episodes. This whole artist statement and things. I don't. I don't know if it's a sense of elitism or something like that. It's like that you. What I don't understand that what that has to do with anything. Yeah, it's like and to call you guys out on it on top of that, it's like what is it? I'm here. Yeah. Obviously, it was good enough to get in.
Yeah.
So the fact that you're shaming, 2 groups, if you will, is a little shameful in itself.
Although I will say that intensive, I think it was 2 weeks, and there were moments where I was like, having that artist meltdown and like bawling, sobbing, and I feel I had to go through that because I do think I was blocked in a way where I wasn't letting my true artist self come out. One of the best lessons I learned there was if you're not having fun writing, then don't do it. Like, you should be having fun writing what you're writing.
Sure. And
out of that came my play, Losing Our Heads, the Guillotine play, which is the full length has only been produced once, but I have it's made up of all these vignettes about the guillotine that are just weird. I mean, they're just weird and disturbed. And I had so much fun writing them. Like, a woman falls in love with a severed head. Right. And she brings it home to dinner. And a guillotine goes for a job interview. I mean, they're disturbing. And I had so much fun with it. And I credit my time at the Kennedy Center. And I didn't censor myself at all. It was like the wackiest stuff I've ever written. And I think because I had to be given permission and I wasn't giving myself permission. I think sometimes as artists, we kind of like, what's going to get produced? What's going to sell? And what I learned there was, who cares? Write it. And that's when the good stuff starts to happen. I mean, not always. I think you need the background. You need to see a million plays and read a million plays and know what you're doing structurally. But then it seeps into you, and then you can just have fun and write.
Where did the breakdown stem from? What was it that triggered that?
We were told never to be late for class. And I got lost, like I had to run to the bathroom or something, and I missed the group, and they were meeting in this other part of the Kennedy Center. So I was late for class. And I got really like, I couldn't find the classroom. I was like lost in the bowels of the Kennedy Center. And we like the day before, like somebody got yelled at for like, I don't know, maybe I missed, but I came in and I was so upset that I was late for class that I just had this meltdown. It was really embarrassing. But it kind of brought me to this place. Like, I think I was being just kind of, we were definitely, the onion layers were getting peeled away. I think there was a lot of intentional, like, who are you as an artist? And let's peel that away a little bit to reveal who you really are. So I think there was a lot of that within the teaching there.
Do you know a way to achieve that without having to go through a program like that? Like, are there some self-discovery things that you recommend or that you know that?
Yeah, I mean, I've done the artist's way a couple of times. I think journaling, lately, I actually am like almost certified to teach yoga. So I think meditation and like yoga and all of that, I think can be really helpful. I still write morning pages. So I think with the pandemic, I've gotten very blocked. I mean, I did write one full, I've still been writing stuff. People are like, well, you wrote a few things. I'm like, yeah, but I wasn't like, there are times when I just wrote like a zillion 10-minute plays in a year. And I've written like one. So I'm going back to that stuff to try to tap in. I think, again, taking a good class, I do something online, not every Friday, but there's this wonderful writer I know, Janine Ladis, and she has organized a little group with some people she knows where we just do free writing, and we've gone away and done this Write at the Beach thing where we literally just write and we get positive feedback on what we've written because it's all rough draft, and we comment on each other's work. So I think immersing yourself and being around writers and not just trying to write in a vacuum can be really helpful.
Are there other workshops besides the Kennedy Center that you've taken that you recommend, or what are some of the things that you walked away with that you still implement or continue to use?
I took a class at, I want to say, I can't remember where. It's been so long. I feel like I have no memory. I've forgotten. So there have been other classes I've taken. I just don't remember.
Sure.
Like, I don't know.
Do you remember any of the lessons learned that you walked away with some good pieces of knowledge and advice that you're like, oh yes, why didn't I think of that beforehand? That seems so obvious. Or
the write what you love, or make sure you're having fun is definitely, I think, number one. The making sure that every scene is needed, I think that is really important. I think I've learned more things lately. I've been studying screenwriting a little more, so those classes are fresh in my brain too. But I can't think of anything. I'm sure it's all there. I've learned some great things. I use it, and then I'm like, well, what did I learn? So,
have you ever gotten a really terrible piece of advice that you're like, no?
I don't know if it was a piece of advice. I had a moment in a playwriting lab where I have had people misread my work. And I think I took it really personally. Or I once had somebody say, oh, 10-year-olds wouldn't talk like that. So I had some 10-year-old characters, and they were being really snarky and a little mean to each other. And one of the writers like, oh, 10-year-olds don't talk like that. And I'm like, I don't know. And at the time I didn't have a child, but I'd recently taught some 10-year-olds. I'm like, I think they do. So right. I think there's sometimes a misconception about like what people talk like, or even with children. I've now written a couple of things for kids, and I have an 8-year-old, and she can be snarky and mean, and she's more advanced than the 10-year-olds I was writing. I think they were like getting their nails done and being snarky in that mean girl way. And I was like, no, I can see my 8-year-old talking like that. So 10-year-olds definitely do.
How do you write for youth?
Well, writing for teenagers, I'm around them all day because I teach high school theater. So that's just about, I think I tap into my teenage self, and just being around the teenagers, it's like their voices are in my head. So it's easy to tap into that. I haven't done too many things with much younger characters, in part because I wasn't around them as much. But again, now I have an 8-year-old, so I have a little bit more. It's like, oh, okay, I can see some drama happening there with an 8-year-old drama on the playground thing, because I'm around them. I think you have to be around kids of a certain age to write for them.
What are themes? I mean, do you tackle the same themes when you write for the young people, or?
No, I mean, it's interesting. The last thing I really wrote for young people was Antigone 3021, which was basically a rewrite of Antigone, that I'd wanted to adapt it for high schoolers for a really long time, because I teach high school. I love the play Antigone, but I could see my kids not connecting with it as well. I've taught it as a 10th grade English teacher, and I thought I need to rewrite that someday. And during the pandemic, it was the perfect time, because you can't really do a Greek chorus over Zoom, like, unless you're going to do a lot of editing.
A Greek chorus over
Zoom.
Oh, Zoom, sure.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, I was like, so I thought, well, how could I rewrite this play? And again, Antigone's a teenager, really, right? So it was just about capturing that voice, and what was Sophocles saying, but how would a kid today say it? Right? What kind of language might they use today? Or really in the future, because I said it 1,000 years in the future.
Yeah. Why 3021?
It was 2021, so I'm like, let's just make it the future.
And what were the technical? What changed in those 1,000 years? Or did we devolve?
I wrote it in such a way that it could be done live. At the time, actually, I produced the very first production of it, where it was done I needed a Zoom play, and I was like, I'm just going to do this myself. And it's now had a few other productions because it's published with Stage Partners. But they kind of digitally, I mean, I sort of made it like they sort of beamed into each other's locations, but it was really Zoom. But if it were done live, that could happen. But it was a little bit dystopian, so they didn't have a ton of major technological advances other than that. Mm-hmm. There was a snarky talk show that took the place of the chorus, so that I could have 4 individual characters speaking their minds separately. I also added some scenes with Antigone and her boyfriend, who is also her first cousin. Which is, in ancient Greece made sense. And I was like, and I actually originally did change it and had them be just friends. And then a reader's like, no, you got to keep it romantic. And I was like, yeah, you're right. It's like,
sure.
Worked in ancient Greece. They can be first cousins. That's fine.
When you write your full lengths, what structure do you use? Do you go 2-act? Do you do 3? I had one playwright who actually enjoys 4-act structure. I
really like the 90-minute 1-act structure. Okay. That really, I feel like I've seen a lot of plays that use that structure. So I gravitate toward that recently. I feel like it's a stretched out 10-minute play.
So is it one scene and one act, or do you have multiple scenes within that? And then how do you approach, what's that structure look like if you have, let's say you have 6 scenes?
Yeah, I think
in a 90-minute.
I think it's the build, right? I would say probably 5 scenes. Maybe it's 5-act. Maybe it's actually 5-act structure, where it's like, sure. I mean, that for Antigone 3021, it was definitely 5-act structure, because it's, it was based on Sophocles' structure. Right. But where it's just, I guess it could be 6. It doesn't, where each scene just builds off each other. I do like stuff where it goes back and forth in time, though. I like things that don't seem linear. I haven't always made that fully work.
Do you, like in terms like betrayal? What is that, Pinter?
Yeah.
But yeah, where it's all over the place. I think it jumps back and forth in time. And
yeah, I have a one act like that just goes back and forth with these scenes. And I just wrote it. People thought I had written it linearly and then spiced it up. And I was like, no, it just kind of happened that way. So I think when I write that way, it sometimes happens naturally. Although with The Woman in the Teal Scarf, I just knew I needed to end it kind of where it started, or not quite. Like the last scene had to kind of go backwards in time to resolve something.
How do you know when you're finished? When you've gotten to the end? I mean, like, yeah. Okay, this is the good. Did you always know where it's going to end?
I don't. I usually know where the play is going to end. I don't always know when I'm done with it, though. I think there's just a point where I'm like, okay, I'm tired of writing this thing, so I'm going to start sending it out, and then somebody's going to give me feedback, and I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I should add that scene, or delete that, or whatever.
When is it? When is it time for a monologue? Like I'm fascinated by this because is when I write, it's just like it doesn't ever seem like there's a monologue in anything that I write.
I recently started to try to put them in where I'm like, ooh, but in my 10-minute plays, there's usually the point of breakdown where this person just needs to be like, and it somewhat toward the climax of the play where it just needs to come out. And it's the height of conflict and all those unsaid things. That's where the subtext stops, right? That's when everything that wasn't being said has to come out. And the things that are going to kill the relationship, if it's a relationship play, that's the point when all of the things will be said.
Are there rules to a monologue?
Probably. I don't know if I know what they are.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just,
I've been told like it should stand by itself. It should have this. My characters just say things.
Do you write? Do you just write monologues? Do you just have like or the monologues that you have published? Are they always from a particular piece, and you just submitted it as a standalone?
All of my monologues that I have published are from plays. I think that might have been a requirement actually for the submissions I've done. I've seen submissions for like monologue about, and I don't have just standalone monologues. They always come out of a play.
There was somebody, I can't remember who it was, what episode, there was somebody who said that they use their monologues as a marketing tool to where they would have all their monologues on their website. I've
seen that. I've actually seen that and thought that's a really great idea. I should do that on my website. It just hasn't happened yet. And as I said, I think the reason my play Bite Me gets so many productions is because it's in this monologue book. Now I've just had 2 more monologues published. One of the plays isn't published yet, so I'm wondering if people will write to me. It's had like a Zoom production and it hasn't had any other productions yet, so I haven't really had it published yet. So I'm wondering if people will seek me out for that play. Sure. But the other monologue is from Antigone 3021, so that this will be a great experiment. Will I see an uptick in productions? Sure.
How did that work out for you? What's your take on Zoom productions?
Oh, I think they should all just go away now. I'm kind of done with them. Yeah. It worked out. I mean, when I was doing it, I actually I pre-filmed my actors because I was the director. I did it as the drama teacher, and I pre-filmed them in front of a green screen. I added stuff. I had a ton of fun editing the whole piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there wasn't like a live production per se.
No, we streamed it through, YouTube or something. It was my work. That was another thing. It was just easier to write something at the time because all the rights things. I've seen Zoom productions. In fact, we've had somewhere like they did it on Zoom but filmed it, and the lag time, and you can't not everybody has great internet. And I've seen actually some Zoom productions of my own plays, which were like really cute and nicely done. But even I think the better ones were where they're like, we're just going to film it and treat it as a, in fact, one of my guillotine ones, they turned into a film, and it was the woman who brought home the severed head. And they literally had a guy playing the severed head in the film. Like it worked so well. And it was two actors who'd clearly filmed themselves in quarantine, and they pieced it together. But I think Zoom as a platform, just it doesn't really work. There's too much. Like, I like things to be snappy. I was editing out pauses like crazy.
Sure, of course,
put together my own play.
Yeah, I think if you're not, unless you're watching it live, I think it's kind of hard otherwise to do it. There was a wonderful production of Dracula that they did as a one act. It was a high school up in Northern California that was part of a festival that's up there. But they did something similar. I don't think they green screened anything, but they did do like some some backdrop stuff, and they did similar to that. I think that that's the only way that it can really work. I'm not quite sure that live productions benefit from it, to actually where everybody's like logging in at the same time and interacting with each other. I'd be surprised if there are actually any more productions that are going about that route at this point. I think that they can go the way of the dodo at this point.
I get emails for like a company around me that is still doing Zoom readings on Sundays. And I'm like, that's really lovely, but why? We can go back. We can wear masks, but if you need us to, but I recognize there are still people with significant health issues and whatnot. I don't want to minimize that.
No, of course.
I have no interest in sitting through a Zoom production ever again.
Sure. Have you ever attended any productions of your work where it's just like, what did you do? Like, it's just like, it was really hard to sit through and watch.
So one of my early plays, The Tea Exercise, was produced, and I won't say where it was. It's had several productions. So, and it's had some very good productions. But I ended up rewriting it, or writing in like no blackouts, and actually taking it, because it was written like 11 short scenes. And I think I wrote a stage direction at the beginning, like scenes should flow together. But they were shutting the lights off in between each scene and like doing set changes. And this is like a 20-minute play it's like, it was so painful. Like they'd have like these clunky set changes and then do this like 1-minute scene and then like a clunky set change where it went back and forth in time. It's like two actors discussing the biz, and one of them makes it and one of them doesn't. And it's like they go back and the last scene is them like when they're still young and neither of them have gone off. And the one who doesn't get a career in acting is telling the other one like what she loves about acting. And it's all about pouring tea, like how you can't try to pour the tea, you're just pouring the tea, which was an exercise I did in Moscow. But it was so painful to watch that I actually, after that point, took the play and rewrote it without any scene breaks, with just like, slight shift in the light, to indicate, or no shift, like just so that the scenes all flowed together, even though it was 11 short scenes with time going back and forth, because that's what I'd envisioned in my head. And just the clunky transitions like kill me. Like as a director, as a theater person, I'm like, no. So yeah, that was one time. And I think my boyfriend at the time was like, never let me take him to the theater again. It was a really painful experience.
Did you do any playwriting workshops or anything when you were in Russia?
No, that was strictly acting. We definitely analyzed a lot of Chekhov. I remember one point where we must have spent like an hour on this like one line or these two lines of Chekhov, like, and how brilliant it was. But so no, we didn't do any writing there.
Was there anything that you learned there that helped you with your playwriting that you could implement?
I think taking it from the actor's perspective, just the acting training, I really think it's helpful for playwrights to, even if they don't see themselves as becoming actors, to spend time being actors, because like what I had to do sort of emotionally and physically to embody certain characters, I do that when I'm writing. I really try to become the characters as I'm writing. I mean, they're voices in my head, and sometimes they're just words on the page, but then I go back and say, is this actable? So I think that really helped.
What determines if it's actable?
Is there something to play? Is there an objective? Do these characters want something?
Okay. And then when you finish your first draft, what's the next step? What do you do next?
I usually force my husband to sit down and do a table read with me.
Just the two of you?
Sometimes, sometimes just the two of us. Like, that'll be before I get other people. Lately, I've had some people come on Zoom, but I haven't been a member of a playwriting group for a while, but often it would be bringing pages or scenes in there. I'm a member of a fiction writing group, so my latest 10-minute play, I just sent it to my fiction writing group and was like, I know this isn't what you normally read, but what's your feedback? And that actually was great, because it's a play based on A Midsummer Night's Dream, and half of them really knew the play, but some of them were like, yeah, I vaguely remember the play. Something theater people would really get, but I got great feedback on lines that didn't make sense to somebody who didn't know the play, which was important, because an audience, most people will know the play, but I want to reach everybody. And it was, minor changes.
When you read with your husband, do you always take his advice, or do you?
No.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm like,
are there things that he says like you don't know what you're talking about?
Yeah. I'm like, no, well, you read that line. Yeah. He actually, in one of my plays, he like wants me to change something. I was like, you just don't understand it. Like, you don't get what I'm writing there. So I ignore him. But so I do listen. He's given me some really great advice.
Okay. I was going to say, has he ever been right with anything? I was going to ask if he'd ever been right about anything.
Yeah, he has been right. He's given me some really good advice. Actually, with I can't even remember which play, but he's titled a few of my plays. Oh. He titled The Unbearable Lightness of Greening. I think he titled Frostbite, because I'm like, what should I name this play? And he's and he's been like, I forget what it was, but I think he said I needed to start the play in a certain place. It's like, I was like, oh, you're totally right. Or where something wasn't quite happening and I needed to flesh out. And I was like, you're absolutely right. I think you know when feedback is right. I think sometimes it's like, if you really struggle against it, sometimes it's right. But I think there's other times you're like, yeah, you're right.
How do you deal with rejection?
I cry.
Still?
Seriously. No, not always. I think the good thing is I'm submitting a lot these days. So when you're submitting a lot, you kind of like, oh, that place. And then when you get something good, it's like, oh, yay. I totally forgot I submitted to that. There have been a few things that I've really wanted. And it's like, it has locked me up at times as an artist. I think there's been periods in time where I'm just like, I'm quitting writing. I'm never writing again. And not necessarily from one rejection, but like from a series of rejections or something that just never. And I think it just takes time to move on for me. So yeah, I do take things personally.
Which understandably, or understandable. What criteria do you look for when you submit?
So when I'm submitting play, I generally, there's a lot of places that I've just submitted to for years with the 10-minute plays that I'm like, okay, I know this is a well-known festival. I look at past maybe festivals and say, do I know any of the playwrights who've had things in this? Are they names I recognize and names I respect? I won't pay a fee.
Okay.
So I'll never, like, if it's like, if I think that the theater is asking for more than it's like some little theater that is they're like, we're not going to pay you, and we want world premiere rights, and we want this kind of play, and we want you to reformat it in this way. I'm like, no, like, who are you? Like, you're not going to pay me. So I think I sort of also often, I used to do this more. I don't do it as much, but where I'd be like, okay, I'm going to I have my sort of top tier submissions. And then if I don't make it there, I've got like the next tier. But then I realized that was often a really slow process. So I just kind of send, I have like the places I'll submit to that again, finding them on Playwright Binge, or I see that colleagues have been produced there. So I'll go look up the theater and say, oh, what are they looking for? I'm not agented for playwriting right now. So it's,
So payment or production, which one's more important to you?
Probably production at this stage.
Okay.
I feel like I'm not, like, you're not going to make a ton of money writing 10-minute plays.
Sure.
Right? So not that payment's not important. I do feel playwrights should get paid. Our work should be valued. But there are places that I send to regularly that don't pay, but it's a prestigious production. So
sure,
that's valuable.
So this is a playwriting podcast, but I'm going to ask this question anyways because I'm fascinated. You are part of a group called Neon Lights. Is that right? There was something about neon lights.
I was in an anthology.
Okay.
Called, yes.
That's what it was. Okay. It was 80s inspired neon
80s
noir.
Inspired neon noir. So
What's
I write
neon noir?
I don't really know, but I think noir that takes place in the 80s. So I remember I saw the posting for this, and I thought, I'm going to write a story about a girl who wants to be a female wrestler in the 80s. Because one of my dirty little secrets is that I used to watch wrestling when I was a kid, like Hulk Hogan kind of stuff.
Yes.
Cyndi Lauper, that stuff. So
Captain Lou Albano.
Yes. Captain, I used to see him. Yeah. I live not far away from Captain Lou Albano. So I remember awesome. Like seeing him in a parking lot when we were like at a store somewhere. So I'm like, I know the 80s. I was a kid and I remember the 80s well. And I wrote a short story about a girl who wants to be a pro wrestler. Also, my mom used to tell people that I wanted to be a wrestler, which was a total lie. I never wanted to be a wrestler, but my mom thought because I watched wrestling or something that I wanted to be a wrestler. I'm like, no. So I think that somehow scarred me, but I don't know. But I was like, I went to a WrestleMania on like closed circuit TV. My dad did bring us to Madison Square Garden, like the night that like Rowdy Roddy Piper broke the gold records over Captain Lou's head, or like it was something.
That's
like I
awesome.
can write this story, and I did, and luckily they selected it and they published it in this great anthology. So
well, when I was going through your bio, I actually had to go back through and confirm that you had not submitted to me in the past, because I have a noir festival called Play Noir. It's all film noir styled one acts. And so I'm like, I'm going to be really embarrassed if I've received some of your plays.
No, I don't think I've written a noir. It's funny. I write mystery fiction.
Right.
And I've wanted to write like a mystery play, but it hasn't happened. I have a few that I've started where I'm like, oh, they're going to like wake up and there's going to be this dead body and it's on stage. And I've never finished writing a mystery play. And I don't know, it's like two different brains.
Sure.
My mystery fiction writing brain and my playwriting brain that haven't met yet. And I want to introduce them. All
right. Eventually. Yes. Hopefully we'll get Play Noir started back up. So hopefully this will give you some inspiration and motivation to get something written. Where can people find your work?
If they go to ninamansfield.com, everything is listed on the website.
Everything?
No, not yet. I have to update the website.
Fair enough.
But I'm also on Instagram, on Twitter, and Nina J. Mansfield. Usually at Nina Mansfield or Nina J. Mansfield.
One more time, and I won't interrupt.
Oh, Nina J. Mansfield for Twitter, at Nina Mansfield for Instagram. I think I'm Nina Mansfield Writer on Facebook. So, and ninamansfield.com.
Wonderful. Well, Nina, thank you for coming on to the Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video with a friend, and leave a comment down below, even if it's just to say hi. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.